I am pleased to welcome Dr. Kenneth McLaughlin as a speaker at tonight's CUW meeting. Ken has been a very good friend of our family for more than 50 years and a valued member of the local community since the early days of his career as an academic and scholar. Dr. McLaughlin was born in a small town, Hespeler, and received a secondary education in what was then the city of Galt. The next step in his growing academic interest took him to the University of Waterloo, where he registered through St. Jerome's University College, as St. Jerome's University was then called. After receiving his Bachelor of Arts degree from UW in 1962, Ken pursued his academic studies at Dalhousie University in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Ken fell in love with Halifax and has had a keen interest in urban history ever since. Having received his master's degree from Dalhousie, Ken pursued and developed his growing interest in urban history. He pursued his doctoral studies under the academic counsel of some of Canada's most distinguished scholars. After his graduation from U of T, Ken began his university career at the University of Waterloo, and in 1975 he transferred to the cross-campus site of St. Jerome's University, where he continued to mature his interest in urban and local history, where he also became immersed in the demands of administrative responsibilities, both on campus and where he was chair of the history department and vice president academic dean, and also within the local community, acting as chair of the Regional Heritage Foundation, chair of the restoration of Joseph Snyder House, co-chair of the building committee of the Vasili School of International Affairs, and the historical consultant for the award-winning Ken Sealing Waterloo Region Museum. His list of publications is indeed extensive and impressive. He began his publishing career with an examination of the influence of German immigrants to the local community. Co-authored a history of Kitchener with John English, wrote a history of Cambridge, assisted in developing a published history of his hometown of Hespeler, composed a history of Waterloo, was energetically involved in local history as well as a variety of local, provincial, and national historical associations, and ultimately became passionate about the history of the University of Waterloo and of St. Jerome's University, having assisted in the composition of the tracking of the development of St. Jerome's and the publication of its 100th anniversary. His passion for understanding and development of local history led to his receiving of a number of awards and recognitions, including the prestigious Lieutenant Governor of Ontario's Heritage Award for Lifetime Achievement. His interest in history of the University of Waterloo resulted in his appointment as UW's official historian and the inevitable publication of a series of books on UW's development and UW's unique and essential evolution as a cornerstone of the concept of the cooperative university, a university involving its students both in on-campus conceptual research and a practical community-based hands-on application of the ideas emanating from on-campus research. The most recent of his publications on the development of UW as a unique and important academic center is entitled Unbundling Computing at Waterloo, and his passion for the local history of a region is captured in his most recent publication, Our Past, the Ormston Heritage House, a window in Waterloo Township's history. In light of all the above, no one should be surprised that Ken and his wife, Elizabeth, live in an officially designated heritage home in Waterloo. Although much of his time has been taken up with academia, he has dedicated generously of it to his family, his wife Elizabeth, his 2 daughters, and his 5 grandchildren. There is no one more qualified than Dr. Kenneth McLaughlin when it comes to an understanding of the transition of this area from a small town maker of buttons and tires to an enviable, innovative center for engagement in our modern world of IT and innovation, to enlighten us with his presentation from rural community to high-tech metropolis. Please welcome tonight's speaker, Dr. Kenneth McLaughlin.
Thank you, John. Could you put you, I think you're on mute, Ken.
I think I just unmuted myself. Oh, I did. Did I?
Yes, you did.
Okay. After that wonderful introduction by Donna, it's a lot to live up to. I want to talk about a couple of things tonight, but one of the things that fascinates me is the development of the University of Waterloo. I've actually written 4 books about Waterloo, and each of them in turn is different and is not really what I expected, but I followed the research, and the research led me in what I think were in fairly new and interesting ways. I have regularly been asked to speak to the Board of Governors of the university and to bring down new members, especially up to date about what the university is really like and its culture and its tradition. And after the last lecture, they thought maybe we should just put this onto a video and we could show a video, and then I'm retired. And so we have a short video. It lasts 10 minutes, but it's fascinating in terms of what I thought for all of you to look at is to ask yourselves, if this is the way history is going to be learned, if all of our children or many of our children and grandchildren are learning online, this is an online version of history. I was asked to just be the researcher for it, to offer research ideas. What happened was something rather different, as you'll see. My interest was making it correct, but it turned out their interest was in making me say a lot more than I intended to say and participate regularly. All this was kind of a shock, and we just sat down one day and did it. And so there'll be some repetition. And the other thing I wanted you to look at, though, over 10,000 people have seen the video, and it was introduced just before the pandemic started. 10,000 people, for if this was a book, would be a best-selling book in Canada. So videos clearly introduce history to people in a very different way than books do. And so many more people get history from this kind of visual information than would ever get it from if I took all my books together and piled them up. You'd have probably not 10,000 people who have written, it's probably more than 10,000 now, too, have looked at the video in 1 year. So I'm going to ask to show the video, and I want you to think about the images in it. And I want you to think about the biases that appear in it. I want you to think about gender balance, because we did it 2 years ago. And so the questions about issues, and at the end of it, they asked me if I would predict what would be the important issues in the future. And I wasn't expecting this. And so when you're suddenly on camera and they ask you this question, so I chose the importance of women in the university. So I'm happy to say that tonight. Then I looked at the idea of Indigenous people in the University of Waterloo, Indigenous. And I thought 2 years ago, that was a novel topic. Now, if you did anything, you would be criticized if you didn't introduce that topic. And the other topic I suggested was international relations, the role of Canada and our understanding of our relations with other countries, rather than seeing us as a small local university, that in fact we were going to be playing on an international stage. And you'll get a chance to make your call on that as well. So I'd like to look at the video with you, and I'll stop talking. We can quickly run up the video, and then when it's over, and it's 10 minutes. When it's over, then I really hope you have some good questions and some comments, because that's what I was really aiming for. So I sent the video in
You want me to start it now for
Yes,
you, Ken?
please. Right now would be perfect.
All right,
Yes.
and go.
So we need
Need the sound.
audio.
Can you increase the audio?
Yes,
Christine, you'll need to go back and start again with share audio on.
start again?
Go back and restart it with share audio when you click on
Oh.
the share tab.
Okay, sorry. Yep. I can hear it quite fine, but I guess you can't.
Right.
New share. Oh, there, you're right. Share computer sound. Sorry about that. Here we go. Then I'll start from the beginning.
With more than 500,000 residents, it's one of the fastest growing regions in Canada, and around the world, it's known as a pipeline for innovation. The Waterloo region is home to tech giants like Google, OpenText, and BlackBerry. It's a key feature of what The Economist has called Canada's emerging Maple Valley. It's got agriculture, manufacturing, higher education, think tanks, a strong insurance district, and a thriving startup culture. But it wasn't always this way. The city of Waterloo started as a largely rural Ontario landscape. So how exactly did it grow into a tech hub with an international reputation? Well, just look at some of the globe's leading innovation ecosystems and you'll find the key. A world-class research university at the city's core. Silicon Valley has Stanford, Boston has MIT, and we have the University of Waterloo. Every year, roughly 40,000 students step into a legacy of academic excellence, one that's rooted in research, entrepreneurship, and a distinct habit of breaking from tradition. But to discover how this legacy came to be, we need to talk to an expert. The expert, really, retired Professor Kenneth McLaughlin. Ken has done an impressive amount of research not only about the university, but about the region. He was part of the second class ever to attend the university's Faculty of Arts and returned shortly after to teach Canadian history.
As it turns out, I've written 3 books about the university, although I intended to write none. And it's the vibrancy of the campus that strikes me over and over and over again. I still feel like a student. I don't feel like a retired professor.
The rich history of Waterloo is built on a unique combination of progressive thinkers, their steadfast resilience, and a community backing them every step of the way. It all goes back to the 50s and 60s, the formative years that created the university's DNA. It was post-war Canada, and people were on edge. The Cold War had begun, and the Soviet Union was growing more and more powerful, sparking fears that Canadians were falling behind.
Coming back from the Second World War, so many young men and women saw themselves frustrated by the fact that Canada hadn't really changed during the war years. Universities were stuck in the pre-World War II mentality. They thought there's a great future for Canada, but we're not getting it, we're not grasping it.
The time is fast approaching, if it has not already arrived. We shall be alone on uncharted economic seas, with no one really to care if we sink or swim.
At this time, the future University of Waterloo was known as Waterloo College Associate Faculties. But this emerging institution quickly moved in a new direction thanks to 2 key players, Gerald Hagee and Ira Needles. Hagee and Needles both secured Bachelor of Arts degrees and came from robust careers in industry. Together, they laid the groundwork for one of the university's guiding values, creating a strong network between academia, industry, government, and business.
Hagee was just a really creative, inventive kind of a man, not a man with a strong tradition of university. But they all talked about Canada after the war, about its need to expand, to develop from the point of view of industry. And what Ira Needles thought was they need to do that along with universities. They can't do it by themselves.
In what they called the Waterloo Plan for Applied Science and Engineering, Hagee and Needles introduced a new style of learning to Canada known as cooperative education, or co-op.
A freshman engineering student registers in September and for approximately 4 months attends classes. Then we split the class into 2 sections, one staying in school and one going into industry. You get the same amount of academic training as at conventional universities, but much more and much better integrated opportunities to apply what you were learning.
The Waterloo Plan was something so dramatic and challenging that you'd think, how could you ever possibly do that?
People were skeptical. Traditional academics thought co-op would threaten universities, referring to it as interrupted education. But Waterloo forged on in the face of criticism. Overwhelming support from industrialists poured in from across the country, and the response from students was huge. What officially started in 1957 then shortly after became the University of Waterloo. That same year, another one of Waterloo's original disruptors emerged. Douglas Wright, Waterloo's youngest ever Dean of Engineering at just 32 years old. Wright thought that, in addition to co-op, theoretical research could be another way for the school to distinguish itself, giving Waterloo grads both academic and experiential learning.
I think Doug Wright had an idea that engineering could not be satisfied with just analyzing. It had to do and had to create. For Doug Wright, it was the present and the future that he was concerned about.
Co-op then expanded from engineering into other areas.
Suddenly, arts is in co-op, science is in co-op. So the University of Waterloo has this balance between co-op and pure research in both areas all the time.
This interdisciplinary thinking is really what drove the Waterloo spirit in the early days. The secret ingredient, if you will. This understanding that problem solving must be infused with creativity. And it's this thinking that's still alive at Waterloo today. The 60s was a time of vibrant patterns, bell-bottoms, and the beginning of a worldwide digital revolution. Enter Wes Graham. Known for his commitment to making computers as easy to use as a pencil and paper. Graham worked at IBM, and after a work trip to British Columbia, he missed his flight back to Toronto. A flight that crashed into a mountain, killing everyone on board.
Wes was terrified of flying after that and refused to fly. And so when he came back to Toronto, he thought he wanted a place where he could walk to work rather than fly.
Graham took up a position as lecturer in statistics at Waterloo, leaving his life of computers behind. Or so he thought. Like Waterloo's unconventional thinkers before him, Graham was determined to bring about change and make education more relevant, which for him meant using technology. In 1960, he urged the university to get an IBM 610, and he later became the director of the Computing Center.
Other universities didn't have computers or they were trying to build them, whereas Wes said, no, what we have to do is figure out how to use them more effectively.
In 1966, Waterloo was one of the first universities in North America to establish computer science as a separate department within math. And today, it's one of the globe's top computer science universities.
Here, the students used to pick the lock into the computer room, and they were there over their lunch hour playing with the computers, doing things. And when Wes found them, he encouraged them.
Graham made sure computers weren't restricted to faculty or grad students, but that undergraduate students could use them too. It was this access to technology that became crucial to a long list of innovative ideas coming out of the university, a list that continues to grow today. As Wright became the university's third president in 1981, Waterloo's spirit grew more entrepreneurial. It wasn't just about new ideas anymore. It was how you use those ideas to create something better. As early as the 70s, Waterloo started giving professors ownership of their research and helping them with the licensing of their intellectual property. This whole concept was new for Canadian universities, and it started a long legacy of Waterloo startup companies.
As an historian, it's often difficult to try to anticipate the future. But if I was to guess at the future, I would be emphasizing the importance of women in the university tradition. And I think looking at Indigenous areas of interest and also developing international relations, those are some things that I think this university is doing remarkably well.
And that's why Waterloo has attracted so many other trailblazers. People like math professor William Tutt, a former code breaker in World War II, or Mike Lazaridis, who, as an undergrad, founded the company Research in Motion. That's the company that created BlackBerry and revolutionized instant communication. Today, hundreds of companies have Waterloo in their DNA, with more than 300 getting their start at the Velocity Incubator. They're collectively worth more than $1 billion, driving Canada's economic prosperity. Waterloo's legacy includes astronaut Chris Hadfield, Nobel laureate Donna Strickland, two-time Olympic gold medalist Heather Moyes, renowned poet Rupi Kaur, an original founder of the world's Blue Box recycling program, Eric Hellman, and even Stephen Hawking, who spoke at the opening of the Myconophilia Lazaridis Quantum Nano Center.
I think that the idea of innovation and entrepreneurship speak to the spirit of Waterloo then and the spirit of Waterloo now, and it has become a guiding factor in the university. There's no question that Gerald Hagee, in his own way, was both innovative and entrepreneurial. So was Ira Needles, so was Doug Wright, so was Wes Graham.
This is what the University of Waterloo is all about. It's a fine balance between academic excellence and experiential learning. It's innovation, experimentation, and strong partnerships with business and government. It's a shared commitment to pushing beyond boundaries and making an impact as we tackle the challenges that face our world.
Okay, Ken, I think you're on.
Okay, thanks, Christine. So I guess what I wanted to ask you was if you had any reactions to that video. I don't know if I was doing it again, I would do it that way, but it really struck a chord about talking about the culture of this community and the culture of this university in a way that was unique and important. And I noticed now that when everyone's talking about Faradin when he's retiring, the keywords are innovation and entrepreneurship. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? Because we had identified that previously, and now that has become the watchword. I also was fascinated by the gender balance in those videos, not the men, but the number of the young students, especially students. And I think it's really important that students be a part of a university. And those were some of my quick reactions, but I'd like to open it up to see if any of you had any thoughts, because it seemed to me it was a better way to introduce Waterloo than to drone on as a talking head or with PowerPoint. Does anyone have any comment that they'd like to make?
Having been here since the beginning, I really enjoyed that. It was wonderful to see the whole, the spread of the 65 years or so. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, it was kind of fun to watch the first director of co-op. We had to edit him because he kept talking about the men or the boys, and you notice that disappeared. It's only the students, but so they actually have a technique for changing his words around to get rid of that gender distinction that he, of course, in those days, all the engineers were boys or young men.
I'm glad to finally have a different reason to think about Ira Needles. I'm a graduate of University of Waterloo with a BA in English in 1970, a few years ago. And the only association I have with Ira Needles is really disliking driving along Ira Needles Boulevard and going through all the roundabouts.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I avoid it like the plague. And so now at least I have some appreciation for the contribution he made in the development of the university that I ended up attending.
Well, it's interesting because he's the man who really pushed co-op. The idea of a co-op didn't actually begin here. It began here in a very real way. But it was for pre-engineering or high school, and it was for apprentices who had then to take an academic course. And Ira Needles picked up the idea of co-op and said, we should do that at the university level. And it was really Ira himself, because he was president of VF Goodrich, so he had lots of contacts all over Canada for he needed to get industries to hire these students. And Needles was really the man who sold industries across Canada on the importance of hiring co-op students. So he's really, I think, really significant. And his son was a Stratford famous Shakespearean actor. So even though he's talking co-op and business, his son William was one of the most famous and long-term actors at the Shakespearean Festival. He also got a degree from Waterloo, that is an honorary one.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, I loved your film, and I'll tell you a little story. My husband, Tom Brostowski, was one of those young professor engineers who started in 1962, and he was at Waterloo for 25 years. Unfortunately, he passed away June 19th. And when I walk on the ring road, I think of all the achievements of these young professors who got together and worked so hard to make Waterloo what it is. It's a very consoling way of grieving for me. So I just wanted to let you know that I really appreciate your film and all the, makes me realize all the accomplishments that so many people contributed to the university. So thank you.
You're welcome, Louise. Tom was a really significant and important professor and vice president academic before we created the position of provost. And I did interview him several times, but he was fascinating in terms of his idea that when they came here, they knew they had to be different. They knew they had to be radical. They knew they had to move ideas forward rather than just teaching things that he had done in graduate school at Princeton, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a common theme that everyone coming to Waterloo said, well, we can't just do what we did in graduate school. We have to introduce new ideas and new ways of learning. In fact, one of my books has the title, Out of the Shadow of Orthodoxy.
Mm-hmm.
And the phrase is that for Waterloo to succeed as a university, it had to get beyond the shadow of orthodoxy. That means cast by the University of Toronto, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, we would just be a small provincial school. And so from the beginning, there was this push to create something different at Waterloo. And Tom really was one of the leaders in that movement.
Well, I thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Ken, this is Anita Davis. I worked in the high-tech field for 2 decades. And so when you talk about the pipeline of innovation and the fact that through West Graham, University of Waterloo became a top computer science university, it had and I think you said it, the pipeline of innovation and the engineering and computer science really fueled the innovative spirit in the Waterloo region. And I think it changed the face of industry.
I do too.
And one of the things you mentioned in here was that the university made a decision that they would transfer ownership of inventions to the inventor rather than the university. So I recall that in what we call the dot-com era, so the mid-90s, where young innovators came in, they got seed money and they started a company and they grew it and it went public. None of that would have happened if the university had held on to the ownership of innovation.
You're right.
Some time ago, I did some consulting with the university in McMaster University, and I was shocked that they kept ownership of innovation. And I saw a real difference in the way that university grew compared with how the University of Waterloo grew.
Yeah, and it's not just the university, it's the whole community. I mean, I could make the argument that the whole community of Waterloo really is highly dependent on the University of Waterloo and the ideas. So in that video, we emphasized the velocity and the areas around Communitech now. All those things came out because of Waterloo, and Google only came here because of David Johnson persuading them this was the kind of community they should be in. The ideas are just over and over and over and over again, and it's the ownership of intellectual property. And I said in the video, or at least it was expressed, that was unusual, and other universities didn't do that.
Right.
And there are two people. Wes Graham was part of it because that had to do with licensing agreements for his computer software, especially the new one that they created for the early IBMs. And the other one was a man called Ernie Holmes in engineering, who was persuaded that that was the right way to go. And we can just start listing off. In the book, I think we have 500 companies that we've listed off that developed because of that. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's really critically important too.
Yeah. Certainly, I think it really, really impacted how well this community grew, and just putting it on the map because of the University of Waterloo and your innovation and new ideas.
The cute story about Wes Graham, who really did drive computing when he came here after leaving a really high-level management position at IBM, but he would have to have traveled extensively. And his, I guess it's his mother-in-law who wept, saying, how could you leave a career in business to go to this little university, which is really just in a little muddy town? And she was wrong about that one, I think. No, she was wrong. It was kind of a risky thing, because he was really a rising star at IBM in those days when IBM was really the technology company in Canada. But terrified of flying, absolutely terrified. And he did walk to work in the early years too. There's a question, can they share this movie with others?
May I put in a comment about it was called Correspondence originally, and came out of the physics department. Dr. Jim Leslie, a colleague of my husband, initiated it with himself as administrator and 4 professors. My husband was one of them. And from that, it grew into what was called distance learning, and was tremendously successful for the University of Waterloo.
Absolutely. And still is, and not more so now, because they've become much more sophisticated in the way they prepare online courses. About a decade ago, they started changing the way they would prepare online courses. And in those days, it was just tape recording. And then they started using videos, and now it's very sophisticated, and there's a huge growth industry all over the world based on Jim Leslie and his other partner who in physics, who started that for science. I even had to lecture in it. I had to create a course on it. It's really hard to do.
Yes, they did find they had some learning curves that, a cough or a sneeze or family members making a noise meant that they would have to, this was in the very early days, they'd have to re-record the lecture. But my husband, another promotion for him, Howard John Smith, was the first to put together a kit that could be sent out so that his people didn't have to come and do to Waterloo. And of course, they were all over Canada. Didn't have to come and do the lab courses. And so it was an electronics kit, and they absolutely loved it. And then I think the next people to do something was the geologists, and they sent out rocks, which was pretty heavy. And then I imagine that side has got really much more innovative over time.
Yeah. Well, we just send out ideas in history. There was a question though about, can this video be, this video is available online. It's called Beyond Tradition on YouTube. That's it. 2 words, Beyond Tradition. And then you type in on YouTube, and that's how you can see it. That's how we got it tonight, Christine, right? We got it online.
Yes, and we can certainly send out the link to the membership if you don't mind, or put it on our Facebook page.
No, the university wants it desperately. They're happy.
Perfect.
Because, as I say, we got caught up in COVID, and then everything stopped. There's no way to introduce it or do anything. So the fact that we even got 10,000 people looking at it was, I thought, a real achievement.
Okay, great. Well, we'll certainly put it on our Facebook page. Thank you.
Good. Well, I should not carry on. I would talk all night if you let me. I'll just give it one quick comment that they're doing a video for Ferrodin, and they invited a number of people to contribute. And I was one of those who was invited at the very beginning to produce sit down here at home and create this video. But they said 2 minutes, maximum of 2 minutes. People will not pay attention after 2 minutes. So I think I have probably overdone my welcome as it is, and certainly more than 2 minutes.
Well, Ken, this is Anita Davis. I've been asked to give the thank you this evening. And when Donna mentioned that you lived your formative years in Hespeler, she got my attention. And the reason for that is that when I was 19 and I emigrated by ship to Canada, the place we landed was Hespeler.
No
I was mortified. After the swinging 60s, here I was in Hespeler in 1969.
Well, I had already left by then.
Too quiet.
Luckily.
The only redeeming feature was the fact that for the first time in my life, I saw Mustangs, Camaros, and Firebirds in lime green, bright red, and yellow.
Yeah,
anyway, that's how it began. But I was very, very interested in the way that you portrayed the history, because having been here now for 5 decades, I've seen so much change. And I was fortunate that the chairman of a company I worked for became a chancellor of Waterloo University, Bal O'Donovan.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And
from Cambridge.
Sorry?
I said he lived in Cambridge.
That's right. He lived
in Galt, actually.
He lived in West Galt. That's right. And he was very passionate about innovation.
Yes,
and in fact, he grew the company called Conde. And so we hired engineers from the University of Waterloo. And let me tell you, that was extremely difficult because they were so much in demand that the students could pick and choose the companies that they wanted to work for. And they had all sorts of criteria to select them. And so the entrepreneurial spirit in the decades I've been here, I've seen that parallel of technology and education along with the entrepreneurial spirit and all of the companies that were spawned off that and really have made Waterloo a vibrant region. And as they say, they call it the pipeline of innovation, the formation of Communitech. As you say, it's attracted a lot of very, very prestigious businesses. So I do believe that the University of Waterloo was central to how this region formed and morphed and grew and changed. And I'm actually really enjoyed your video. I didn't think it was too long. I found it extremely interesting, and I'll reflect on it more and more. I mean, even the fashions, like the clothing they wore, the architecture, every aspect. So by sharing that video, you captured the culture as this region grew because of the influence of the University of Waterloo. So thank you very much for your presentation this evening, Ken.
And thank you to Donna Letson as well for her wonderful introduction. Yeah. I couldn't have written it better myself, Donna.
In that case, Ken, I think we can let you go and you can relax for the rest of the evening. And thanks again for being with us here tonight.
Thanks so much.